The steam whistle screamed through the midnight air, and Sarah Fleming's lungs burned as she ran, her leather valise banging against her legs, her dress hem dragging through the dusty platform. But the train was already moving, its iron wheels grinding forward with terrible finality as the conductor pulled himself aboard the last car without a backward glance. She stopped running, chest heaving, and watched the red lantern at the caboose grow smaller in the darkness, carrying away her last chance to reach San Francisco before her brother's wedding, carrying away the money she had already paid for the ticket, carrying away everything she had planned. The platform at Eureka, Nevada emptied behind her as the few other souls who had come to see the midnight departure wandered back toward the lamplit streets of town. September 1883 had brought an early chill to the high desert, and Sarah wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the train's whistle faded into the vast silence of the surrounding mountains. She stood there for a long moment trying to decide what to do. The next westbound train would not come through until Thursday, 3 days away, and she had exactly $4.60 left in her purse after buying the ticket she had just missed. The wedding was Sunday. She would never make it now. Thomas would think she had chosen not to come, that she was still angry about him leaving Boston, about him going west without her after their parents died, but she was not angry anymore. She had only wanted to see him again, to meet the woman he loved, to be part of his life again. The depot office had already gone dark. The station agent had locked up the moment the train cleared the platform, and Sarah could see him now, a hunched figure walking up the main street toward what was probably his home. She picked up her valise and looked around at Eureka, this high desert town she had never intended to see, let alone spend 3 days in. The buildings were mostly wood and adobe, huddled together along a single main thoroughfare with a few cross streets branching off into darkness. Oil lamps glowed in some windows. A piano played somewhere, tinny and distant. She had $4.60. A hotel room would cost at least $1 a night, probably more. That would leave her nothing for food, nothing for unexpected expenses. She could try to find work, but what could she possibly do in 3 days that would earn her anything? And she would still miss the wedding even if she caught Thursday's train. Sarah started walking toward the main street, her practical side taking over even as disappointment settled like a stone in her chest. She would find the cheapest lodging possible, send a telegram to Thomas in the morning explaining what had happened, and figure out the rest from there. She had always been good at figuring things out ever since their parents had died of influenza 2 years ago, leaving her at 20 years old to manage their small household in Boston alone. Thomas had lasted 6 months before the grief and the cramped city life had driven him west to find something new. She had not blamed him then, and she did not blame him now, but she had missed him terribly. The main street was busier than the depot. Men stood outside a saloon, their voices carrying in the night air. A woman in a plain dress swept the boardwalk in front of a general store. 2 horses stood hitched outside what looked like a telegraph office, though its windows were dark. Sarah approached a building with a hand-painted sign reading "Rooms Clean Quiet," and was reaching for the door when a man stumbled out, nearly knocking into her. "Watch yourself," she said sharply, stepping back. He mumbled something that might have been an apology and lurched away down the street. Through the open door, Sarah could see a narrow hallway with peeling wallpaper and a smell wafting out that was equal parts tobacco smoke, unwashed bodies, and something she could not identify but definitely did not like. A woman appeared in the hallway, heavy-set and scowling. "Help you?" she called out. "I need a room for 3 nights. How much?" $1.50 a night in advance. Sarah's heart sank. That was more than she had. "I only have $4 total. Is there anywhere cheaper?" The woman laughed, but it was not a kind sound. "Not in Eureka, honey. Maybe you could try the boarding house over on Silver Street, but Mrs. Chen does not take women traveling alone. Says it is bad for business." She started to close the door, then paused. "You missed the train, did you? I heard it leave." "Yes." "Shame. Well, good luck to you." The door shut firmly. Sarah stood on the boardwalk, feeling lost for the first time since she had left Boston 5 days ago. She had been so careful with her planning, had budgeted everything down to the penny, but she had not accounted for the borrowed wagon that brought her to the depot being late because of a thrown horseshoe, had not imagined the driver taking so long to fix it that they arrived at the station with only minutes to spare, had not thought she might actually miss the train. She walked slowly up the street, looking for any other options. There was a hotel, a proper one with a painted sign and curtains in the windows, but when she stepped inside and asked the price, the clerk told her $3 a night, and she knew that was impossible. She stood outside again trying to think. She could sleep in the depot waiting room perhaps, but she had seen the station agent lock it up. She could try to find shelter in some other public building, but what if someone found her and thought she was a vagrant? The night was getting colder. Her shawl was not enough. She had a wool coat in her valise, and she dug it out now, pulling it on over her traveling dress. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since noon, when the train had stopped briefly in a town whose name she had already forgotten. She had a few biscuits wrapped in a cloth in her bag, and she ate one now, standing in the shadows between two buildings, feeling very alone. She was still eating when she noticed the glow of a campfire in the empty lot at the edge of town. It was perhaps 100 yards past the last building, out where the desert scrub began to take over and the mountains rose dark against the stars. Sarah could see the silhouette of a man sitting beside the fire, and as she watched, he added another piece of wood to it, sending up a shower of sparks. It was probably some drifter, someone passing through. But he had a fire, and fire meant warmth, and she was cold. She hesitated, weighing the risks. A woman alone, approaching a strange man's camp at night, was not wise. But what choice did she have? Freeze on the street? Try to sleep in some alley and hope no one bothered her? Sarah picked up her valise and walked toward the fire. The man heard her coming when she was still 20 feet away. She saw him turn his head, saw his hand move to something at his side, probably a gun, and she stopped immediately. "I do not mean any trouble," she called out. "I missed the train. I'm just cold." There was a long silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in town, the piano was still playing. "Come ahead, then," the man said finally. His voice was deep and quiet. Slowly, Sarah walked forward into the firelight. She could see him clearly now. He was tall, even sitting down, with broad shoulders and dark hair that needed cutting. He wore a battered brown hat, a wool coat that had seen better days, and worn denim pants tucked into scuffed boots. His face was hard to read in the flickering light, but she thought he was young, maybe close to her own age, with several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. His hand had moved away from whatever weapon he carried, and he was watching her with careful, dark eyes. "You can sit if you want," he said, nodding to the other side of the fire. "I have got coffee if you want some." "Thank you." Sarah set down her valise and sat on the ground, not caring that her dress would get dirty. The heat from the fire was wonderful. She held her hands out toward it, feeling the stiffness in her fingers begin to ease. The man poured coffee from a battered pot into a tin cup and reached across the fire to hand it to her. She took it carefully, wrapping both hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "Thank you," she said again. He nodded and poured himself another cup, settling back against his saddle. There was a horse nearby, she realized, a big bay that was hobbled and grazing on whatever it could find. A bedroll was laid out on the ground and a few supplies were stacked neatly beside the saddle. They sat in silence for a while. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it was hot, and Sarah drank it gratefully. She could feel the man watching her, but he did not ask any questions. Did not ask her name, or why she had missed the train, or what she was planning to do. He just sat there, drinking his coffee, feeding the fire occasionally, letting her be. Finally, Sarah spoke. "My name is Sarah Fleming. I was trying to get to San Francisco for my brother's wedding. The train left without me." The man nodded slowly. "That is rough luck." "Yes," she paused. "I do not have enough money for a hotel room. I was not sure what to do." "You can stay by the fire if you want," he said. "I'm not going anywhere tonight. Are you sure? I do not want to impose." "It is just a fire. There is enough warmth for two. He took a sip of his coffee. You will want to stay on this side, though. Wind comes from the west after midnight. You will be warmer with the fire between you and the wind. Sarah felt something ease in her chest, some tight knot of fear she had been carrying. Thank you. That's very kind. It is just a fire, he said again. They fell back into silence. Sarah finished her coffee and set the cup down carefully beside her. She pulled her coat tighter and tucked her hands into her sleeves. The man produced a wool blanket from his supplies and held it out to her without a word. She took it, grateful beyond measure, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Do you have any food? He asked after a while. I've got some beans and jerky if you're hungry. I have a few biscuits, but I would not say no to some beans. He reached for a can and a small pot, spooning beans into it and setting it at the edge of the fire to warm. While they waited, he offered her a piece of jerky, and she took it, chewing slowly. It was tough and salty and tasted better than anything she had eaten in days. What is your name? She asked. He hesitated for just a moment. John. John Garrett. Are you from around here, John? Not originally. I've been working a ranch about 30 miles north, heading down to Arizona to see about some work there. Is there much work in Arizona? Depends on what you're looking for. I hear there are some big cattle operations starting up down there. Figured I would see for myself. Sarah nodded. I grew up in Boston. I had never been west of the Mississippi until last week. Everything is so different out here. How so? The space, mostly. The sky is bigger. The distances are bigger. In Boston, everything is close together, crowded. Here, it feels like the world goes on forever. John added another piece of wood to the fire. I grew up in Missouri. Came west when I was 17. I know what you mean about the space. It can feel lonely sometimes, but I like it. No one breathing down your neck, telling you what to do. Do you have family back in Missouri? Had. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I was raised by an uncle who did not particularly want me around. Left as soon as I could. I am sorry, Sarah said quietly. My parents died 2 years ago. Influenza. My brother left Boston 6 months later. That is why I was trying to get to San Francisco to see him again. Sounds like you have had a rough time of it. Everyone has their troubles. She looked across the fire at him. Thank you for sharing your fire, and for not asking a lot of questions. Figure if you wanted to tell me your business, you would. If you did not, that is your affair. The beans were warm now, and John spooned half of them into his tin cup and handed the pot to Sarah with a spoon. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth and the simple, filling taste. It was not fancy, but it was exactly what she needed. When they had finished eating, John banked the fire a bit and settled back against his saddle. You should try to get some sleep. It will be warmer now than it will be in a few hours. What about you? I will keep the fire going. I do not sleep much anyway. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to say it was not fair for him to stay up all night, but she was exhausted, and the warmth of the fire and the food in her belly were making her drowsy. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and lay down on her side, using her valise as a pillow. The ground was hard and uncomfortable, but she had slept in worse places on her journey west. Good night, John, she said softly. Good night, Miss Fleming. She closed her eyes and listened to the fire crackling, to the distant sounds of the town, to the vast silence of the desert beyond. She thought about Thomas, about the wedding she would miss, about what would happen next. But exhaustion pulled at her, and within minutes she was asleep. Sarah woke to pale gray light and the smell of coffee. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, and then remembered where she was. The fire was still burning, built up higher than it had been during the night. John sat in the same position, or what looked like the same position, his hat pulled low over his eyes. The coffee pot was on the fire, and there were biscuits cooking on a flat stone at the edge of the coals. Morning, John said without looking up. Good morning. Sarah's back ached from sleeping on the ground, and her neck was stiff, but she felt more rested than she had expected. Did you sleep at all? Some. Enough. He poured coffee into the 2 tin cups. Figured you would want some breakfast before you headed into town. That is very thoughtful. Thank you. They ate the biscuits, which John had apparently made from scratch sometime while she was sleeping, along with more jerky and coffee. The sun was rising over the mountains now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Eureka looked different in daylight, less threatening somehow. Sarah could see the buildings more clearly, could see people beginning to move around, starting their day. "What will you do?" John asked. "I'm not sure. I need to find work, I think. Something to earn enough money for food and maybe a room until the next train comes through. Though even then, I will miss the wedding." John was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I'm heading south," he said finally. "Through the desert and down into Arizona. It will take about 10 days on horseback, maybe less if the weather holds. If you wanted, you could come with me as far as the California border. There is a stage line that runs through there, goes to Sacramento, and then on to San Francisco. Might be faster than waiting for the train here." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "You would do that? Take me with you?" "My horse can carry 2 for short stretches, and we would be walking most of the time anyway. It is rough country, but it is not impossible. I could not ask you to do that. It would be completely out of your way." "Not that far out of my way. The trail I am taking goes south-southwest. We would hit the California border in about 4 or 5 days if we kept a good pace. The stage line runs through a town called Ridgecrest. You could catch a stage there." Sarah felt her heart begin to beat faster. "Are you serious? You would really help me? Why not?" John looked up at her, and in the morning light she could see his face more clearly. He had dark brown eyes, a straight nose, and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often. There was a scar on his left cheek, a thin white line that ran from just below his eye to his jaw. He was younger than she had thought, probably not more than 23 or 24. "I am going that way anyway, and you seem like you could use a break." "I do not know what to say. That is incredibly generous." "It is just traveling. I was going to be doing it anyway." He stood up and started packing his supplies. "But we should leave soon if we are going. The days are getting shorter, and we will want to make good time." "Wait." Sarah stood as well. "I need to think about this. I do not know you. I would be traveling alone with a strange man through the desert for days." John paused in his packing and looked at her. "That is fair. You should not trust me just because I shared my fire. For all you know, I could be a thief or worse." "Are you?" "No, but I do not know how to prove that to you." He thought for a moment. "We could stop by the telegraph office before we leave. You could send a message to your brother, tell him what you were doing, tell him my name. That way, if anything happened to you, at least someone would know who you were with." Sarah considered this. It was not perfect, but it was something. And the truth was she did not have many other options. She could stay in Eureka, try to find work, and hope she earned enough to survive until Thursday's train. But that would mean missing the wedding for sure. And she might not find work at all. Or she could take a chance on this quiet cowboy who had offered her his fire and asked no questions. "All right," she said, "let me send that telegram and then we can go." John nodded and continued packing. Sarah rolled up the blanket he had lent her and handed it to him, then picked up her valise. Together they walked into town. The telegraph office was open, and the operator was a middle-aged man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. Sarah composed a brief message to Thomas. "Missed train stop traveling with John Garrett to California border to catch stage. Stop will try to make wedding stop Sarah." The operator counted the words and told her the price. She paid it, watching as he tapped out the message on his key. "Want to wait for a reply?" he asked. "And no, just send it, please." Outside, John was waiting with his horse. The big bay gelding stood patiently while John adjusted the saddle and checked the straps on his supplies. "Ready?" he asked. Sarah took a deep breath. She was about to ride off into the desert with a man she had just met, trusting him to get her safely to a stage line she had never heard of, in a town she had never been to, all so she could try to make it to a wedding that was now only 4 days away. It was probably the most reckless thing she had ever done. "Ready?" she said. They left Eureka heading southwest, following a rough trail that led away from the main road. John walked beside the horse, leading it by the reins, and Sarah walked beside him. He had offered to let her ride, but she had declined, saying she could walk for a while. The truth was, she wanted to feel like she was contributing something, not just being carried along like a piece of luggage. The desert in late September was not as hot as she had feared. The sun was bright and warm, but there was a breeze that kept the air moving and the temperature was comfortable. The landscape was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. The ground was rocky and sandy, dotted with tough scrub brush and the occasional twisted juniper tree. In the distance, mountains rose up in layers, each range a different shade of brown and purple and blue. The sky was enormous, a vast dome of pale blue that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. They walked in silence for a long time. John seemed comfortable with quiet, and Sarah found she did not mind it. There was something peaceful about just walking, about moving forward with a purpose, even if that purpose was just to reach the next water source or the next bit of shade. Around midday, John stopped in the shelter of a rock outcropping and declared it was time to rest. He unsaddled the horse and let it graze on whatever it could find, then pulled out some food for them to share. More jerky, some hard cheese, and a few dried apples. "How long have you been a cowboy?" Sarah asked as they ate. John smiled slightly, the first time she'd seen him do so. "I'm not sure I would call myself a cowboy exactly. I have worked cattle, sure, but I have done a lot of other things too. Worked in mines, built fences, helped drive freight wagons. You do what work you can find out here." "Do you like it, the work, the traveling?" He thought about that. "I do not mind it. It is hard sometimes, but it is honest. You work, you get paid, you move on to the next job. No one cares who your family was or what mistakes you made. They just care if you can do the work." "That sounds lonely." "It can be, but it is also free." He looked at her. "What about you? What did you do in Boston?" "I was a seamstress. I worked in a shop making dresses and alterations. It was not exciting, but it was steady work and I was good at it." "Will you go back to that? After you see your brother?" "I do not know. I have been thinking about staying in California. Actually, maybe finding work in San Francisco. Thomas says it is a good city. Lots of opportunities." "It is a big city, that is for sure. I was there once, a few years ago. Too many people for my taste, but if you are used to Boston, you would probably like it." They rested for about an hour, and then they were walking again. The afternoon stretched on, the sun moving slowly across the sky. Sarah's feet began to hurt, and she could feel blisters forming on her heels, but she did not complain. John had said it was rough country, and he had not been exaggerating. The trail was barely a trail at all in places, just a faint track through the rocks and sand. As the sun started to sink toward the horizon, John began looking for a place to camp. He found a spot near a dry wash where there was some shelter from the wind and a few larger rocks they could use as windbreaks. He built a fire while Sarah sat down and tried to ignore the pain in her feet. "You should take your boots off and let me see your feet," John said without looking at her. "I am fine." "You are limping. You probably have blisters. If you do not take care of them now, they will get worse." Reluctantly, Sarah pulled off her boots and stockings. Her heels were raw and bleeding, and there were blisters on her toes as well. She winced just looking at them. John rummaged in his saddlebags and came back with a small tin of salve and some strips of clean cloth. "This will help," he said, kneeling beside her. "May I?" She nodded, and he gently cleaned the blisters and applied the salve, then wrapped her feet in the cloth strips. His hands were rough and calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "There. That should help. Keep the wrappings on tonight and let your feet breathe. Tomorrow we will re-wrap them before we start walking." "Thank you," Sarah said softly. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did. If your feet get infected, you will not be able to walk, and then we will both be stuck." But Sarah thought there was more to it than that. John Garrett might be a quiet, guarded man, but he was not unkind. They made camp and ate a simple dinner of beans and biscuits. The night was clear and cold, and the stars came out in their thousands, so many that Sarah could hardly believe it. She had never seen so many stars, even on the clearest nights in Boston. "It is beautiful," she said, staring up at the sky. "It is," John agreed. He was sitting on the other side of the fire, his hat off now, his hair falling across his forehead. "I never get tired of it. No matter how many nights I spend out here, the stars always surprise me. Do you ever think about settling down, finding a place to stay instead of always moving?" John was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes, but I do not know if I would be any good at it. I have been moving for so long I'm not sure I would know how to stop." "I think you would figure it out. You seem like someone who can do whatever he sets his mind to." He looked at her across the fire, and something flickered in his eyes, some emotion she could not quite read. "What makes you say that?" "You are out here, surviving, traveling alone, working hard. That takes a certain kind of strength. You are out here too, and you came from Boston, which means you traveled halfway across the country to get here. That takes strength too." Sarah smiled. "I suppose we are both stronger than we think." "I suppose so." That night, Sarah slept better than she had the night before, despite the hard ground and the cold. Maybe it was because she was more tired, or maybe it was because she felt safer somehow knowing that John was keeping watch, tending the fire, making sure nothing happened to her. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. They woke at dawn, ate a quick breakfast, and started walking. John let Sarah ride the horse for a few hours each day, which helped her feet heal, and he walked beside her, leading the animal. They talked sometimes, about small things mostly, about the landscape, about the weather, about their lives before they met. Sarah learned that John had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and that he was smarter than he let on, observant and thoughtful. John learned that Sarah had a stubborn streak and a sharp tongue when she was frustrated, but also a kindness that showed itself in small ways, like when she insisted on sharing her last apple with him, or when she thanked him for every little thing he did. They crossed through varying terrain, moving from the high desert of Nevada into the lower elevations toward California. The landscape changed gradually, becoming rockier and more barren. Water was scarce, but John seemed to know where to find it, leading them to small springs and seasonal creeks that still held a trickle of moisture. They saw no other people, just the occasional sign that someone had passed through before them, a pile of stones marking a trail, a rusted can left behind at a campsite. On the 4th day, they saw the stage road in the distance, a thin line cutting through the desert. John pointed it out to Sarah, and she felt a mix of relief and something else, something she did not want to name. "That is it," John said. "The town of Ridgecrest should be about 5 miles south along that road. We will be there by afternoon." "Good," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. They reached Ridgecrest in the early afternoon, just as John had predicted. It was a small town, smaller than Eureka, with a single street of buildings and a stage station at the far end. The station agent told Sarah that a stage would be leaving for Sacramento the next morning at 8. "That will get you to Sacramento by tomorrow night, and from there you can catch a train to San Francisco easy enough," the agent said. "Fare is $12. Sarah felt her stomach drop. $12? That is right. $12 to Sacramento. She had $4.60. She had not earned any money in Eureka because she had left so quickly, and she had spent some of what little she had on the telegram and food. $12 might as well have been $100. She walked outside feeling defeated. John was waiting with his horse, and he took one look at her face and knew. "How much?" he asked. $12. I do not have it. I do not have anywhere close to it." John was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out bills and coins, and then held them out to her. "Here, this should cover the fare and leave you a bit extra for food." Sarah stared at the money. "I cannot take that. You have already done so much." "Take it. I will make more. There is always work if you are willing to do it." "John, no, this is too much. You barely know me." "I know enough." He pressed the money into her hand, closing her fingers around it. "Take it, Sarah. Go see your brother. Get to that wedding." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. I do not know how to thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You do not have to repay me, just get there safe. That is all I want." She looked up at him, at this quiet, guarded man who had shared his fire and asked no questions, who had walked her through the desert and tended her blisters and given her his money so she could reach her brother. And she realized with a sudden clarity that took her breath away that she did not want to leave him. "Come with me," she said suddenly. John blinked. "What?" "Come with me to San Francisco. Come to the wedding. I know it is a lot to ask, but I do not want to say goodbye yet." "Sarah, I cannot just show up at your brother's wedding. I do not know him. I was not invited." "I am inviting you. You said you were going to Arizona anyway. You could take a few extra days, come to San Francisco, and then head south from there." "Why would you want me there?" "Because I do not want to lose you," she thought. "Because in 4 days you have become important to me in a way I do not fully understand. Because when I think about getting on that stage tomorrow and never seeing you again, it makes my chest ache." But she could not say all that. Instead, she said, "Because you are my friend. Because you helped me when I needed it. And I would like to return the favor. And because I think you deserve to do something just for the joy of it. Not because you need the work or the money, but just because it might be nice." John looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes. He was not used to this, she realized. He was not used to someone wanting him around just for the sake of it. "I do not have any clothes that would be suitable for a wedding," he said finally, and Sarah knew he was wavering. "We can buy you something in Sacramento. I will help you. Please, John, come with me." He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign that he was thinking hard about something. Then he looked at her again, and this time there was the ghost of a smile on his face. "All right," he said. "I will come with you." Sarah felt joy flood through her, so intense it surprised her. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it. But if your brother does not want me there, I am leaving." "He will want you there, I promise." They bought 2 tickets on the morning stage, and John arranged for his horse to be stabled in Ridgecrest until he could return for it. They spent the night at a small boarding house in separate rooms, and Sarah lay awake for a long time thinking about what she had just done. She had asked John to come with her, had practically begged him, and he had said yes. What did that mean? What did she want it to mean? The stage ride to Sacramento was long and uncomfortable, but Sarah did not mind. John sat beside her, and they talked more in those hours than they had in all the previous days combined. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her parents and Thomas, about the dreams she had once had of seeing the world. He told her about Missouri, about his parents and his uncle, about the first time he had seen the mountains and known he could never go back to flat farmland. They talked about books they had read, songs they knew, places they wanted to see. And with every mile, Sarah felt something growing between them, something warm and unexpected and terrifying. They reached Sacramento as the sun was setting, a city of lights and noise after days in the empty desert. John looked overwhelmed, and Sarah took his hand without thinking, leading him through the crowded streets to the train station. His hand was warm and rough in hers, and he did not pull away. They bought train tickets to San Francisco and found a hotel near the station. 2 rooms again? But Sarah found herself wishing, just for a moment, that it did not have to be that way. She pushed the thought aside. They had known each other for less than a week. She could not be feeling what she thought she was feeling. It was just gratitude, just the intensity of their situation. It was not real, but it felt real. The next morning they went shopping. Sarah found a general store that sold ready-made clothes, and she helped John pick out a clean shirt, a vest, and a new pair of pants. He balked at the price, but she insisted paying for half of it with the money he had given her, saying it was only fair. "You look very handsome," she said when he came out of the back room wearing the new clothes. John looked uncomfortable with the compliment, but there was color in his cheeks. "I look like I'm trying too hard." "You look like a gentleman," which you are, even if you do not always dress like one. They caught the afternoon train to San Francisco, and Sarah sent a telegram to Thomas from the station, letting him know she was arriving that day and that she was bringing a friend. She did not give him any details, did not explain who John was or how they had met. That could wait until she saw him in person. San Francisco was everything Sarah had imagined and more. The city sprawled over hills, with buildings packed together in tight rows, and the air smelled of salt and smoke and something indefinably urban. Cable cars rattled up and down the steep streets, and people crowded the sidewalks, moving with purpose. John stayed close to her, and she could see him taking it all in, his eyes wide despite his attempt to seem unbothered. They took a cab to the address Thomas had sent her, a modest house in a neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Sarah's heart was pounding as she knocked on the door. It had been 1.5 years since she had seen her brother, and she was not sure what to expect. The door opened, and there was Thomas. He looked older, his face tanned from the California sun, his hair a bit longer than he used to wear it, but his eyes were the same warm brown eyes she remembered, and when he saw her, his face split into a huge grin. "Sarah!" He pulled her into a crushing hug, lifting her off her feet. "You made it! I got your telegrams, but I was not sure you would actually get here in time. The wedding is tomorrow." I know. I'm sorry I cut it so close. There were some complications." Thomas set her down and looked past her at John, who was standing a few feet back, holding both their bags. "And who is this?" "Thomas, this is John Garrett. He is the reason I'm here at all." "John, this is my brother, Thomas." John set down the bags and held out his hand. "Good to meet you." Thomas shook his hand, looking between John and Sarah with obvious curiosity. "Good to meet you too. Come in, both of you. You must be exhausted." They went inside, and Sarah met Thomas's fiancée, a lovely woman named Claire with kind eyes and an easy laugh. Claire immediately took to Sarah, and the two women talked while Thomas showed John around the house and got him settled in the guest room. Sarah was given the small sewing room, which had been converted into a makeshift bedroom for the occasion. That evening over dinner, Sarah told Thomas and Claire the whole story, how she had missed the train, how John had let her share his fire, how he had walked her through the desert to the stage line, how he had given her the money for the fare. She did not mention that she had asked him to come to the wedding, did not explain the feelings that had been growing in her over the past few days. Thomas listened, his expression serious, and when Sarah finished, he looked at John with something like respect. "Thank you," Thomas said simply. "Thank you for helping my sister. I do not know what would have happened to her if you had not." John looked uncomfortable. "It was not that much, just a fire and some traveling." "It was more than that, and you know it." Thomas raised his glass. "To John Garrett, who helped a stranger and asked no questions." They drank to that, and Sarah caught John's eye across the table. He looked embarrassed but pleased, and she smiled at him, hoping he understood how much this meant to her. The wedding the next day was beautiful. It was held in a small church with flowers and music, and all of Thomas and Claire's friends gathered to celebrate. Sarah stood beside Claire as her maid of honor, and she cried when Thomas said his vows, his voice steady and sure, as he promised to love and honor Claire for the rest of his life. She thought about her parents, about how much they would have loved to see this, and she was both happy and sad all at once. John sat in the back of the church, looking out of place in his new clothes, but staying anyway because Sarah had asked him to. And when she looked back at him during the ceremony, he was watching her, not the bride and groom, and something in his expression made her heart skip. After the ceremony, there was a reception at a nearby hall. There was food and dancing and laughter, and Sarah found herself pulled in a dozen directions, talking to people she had never met, being introduced as the bride's new sister. But she kept looking for John, kept finding him in the crowd, and every time their eyes met, she felt that same skip in her chest. Finally, as the evening was winding down, John approached her. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. "I would love to." He led her onto the floor, and they moved together to the slow music. John was not a graceful dancer, but he was steady. and Sarah felt safe in his arms. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "It means a lot to me that you are here." "I am glad I came. Your brother seems like a good man, and Claire is lovely." "They are very happy together?" Sarah paused. "Do you ever think about that? Being happy like that, with someone?" John was quiet for a moment. "I have thought about it, but I never figured it was in the cards for someone like me." "Why not?" "I do not have much to offer. No land, no money, no prospects. I am just a drifter." "You are more than that, John. You are kind and brave and loyal. Those things matter more than land or money." He looked down at her, and his eyes were serious. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I was not planning on staying in San Francisco. I was going to leave in a few days. Head down to Arizona, like I said, but I do not want to leave. Not if it means leaving you." Sarah felt like she could not breathe. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that somewhere between sharing my fire and watching you walk down that aisle today, I fell in love with you. And I know that is crazy. I know we have only known each other for a week, but I do not care. I love you, Sarah. And if you feel anything at all for me, I am asking you to give me a chance. Let me stay. Let me find work here. Let me prove to you that I can be the kind of man you deserve." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You do not have to prove anything to me, John. I already know what kind of man you are, and I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first night when you offered me your fire and did not ask why I needed it." John's face broke into a smile, a real smile, the kind she had not seen from him before. And then he was kissing her, right there on the dance floor in front of everyone, and Sarah did not care who saw. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, feeling like her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally broke apart, the whole room was staring at them. Thomas was grinning, Claire was crying happy tears, and someone in the back started clapping. Soon everyone was clapping, and Sarah laughed, burying her face in John's shoulder. "I think they approve," John said, his voice warm with amusement. "I think they do." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. John found work at a stable on the edge of the city, taking care of horses and doing repairs. It did not pay much, but it was steady, and he was good at it. Sarah found work as a seamstress in a shop downtown, and the two of them rented a small apartment not far from Thomas and Claire's house. It was tiny, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. They married in October, a small ceremony with just Thomas and Claire, and a few friends they had made in the city. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that she had made herself, and John wore the same clothes he had worn to Thomas's wedding. They said their vows in a judge's office, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. And when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, John kissed her with such tenderness that Sarah knew she had made the right choice. Their first year together was not easy. Money was tight, and they both worked long hours. John sometimes came home exhausted, smelling of horses and hay, and Sarah's fingers were often sore from hours of sewing. But they were happy. They would sit together in the evenings, talking about their days, making plans for the future. John wanted to save enough money to buy a small piece of land, maybe start a horse ranch of his own. Sarah wanted to open her own dress shop someday, make clothes for women who could not afford the fancy boutiques downtown. In the spring of 1884, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told John one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to see how he would react. For a moment he just stared at her, his eyes wide, and then he stood up, crossed to her, and pulled her into his arms. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I am sure. I'm about 3 months along, I think." "A baby." He pulled back to look at her, and there were tears in his eyes. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy? Sarah, I am terrified, but yes, I am happy. I am so happy I do not have words for it." Their son was born in November, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's eyes. They named him Samuel after Sarah's father, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. John was a devoted father, coming home from work every day eager to hold his son, to sing to him, to watch him sleep. Sarah had never seen him so gentle, so open, and she fell in love with him all over again watching him with their child. Over the next few years, their lives settled into a comfortable rhythm. John was promoted to foreman at the stable, which came with better pay and more responsibility. Sarah opened a small dress shop in their neighborhood, working from home so she could be with Samuel. They saved money slowly but steadily, putting aside every penny they could spare. In 1886, they had a daughter, a tiny girl with Sarah's blonde hair and a smile that could light up a room. They named her Grace, and Samuel adored his little sister, always wanting to help take care of her, to show her his toys, to make her laugh. By 1888, John had saved enough to put a down payment on a small ranch about 20 miles outside of San Francisco. It was not much, just 10 acres and a rundown house, but it had good grazing land and a creek that ran through the property. They moved out there in the spring, and John started raising horses, breeding, and training them to sell. It was hard work, harder than anything he had done before, but he loved it. And Sarah loved watching him, seeing him finally have something that was truly his own. They fixed up the house together, painting the walls, repairing the roof, planting a garden. Sarah continued her sewing, taking orders from women in the nearby town, and John built her a proper workshop in one of the outbuildings. Samuel started school in the fall, riding into town with John every morning, and Grace toddled around the ranch, chasing chickens and picking wildflowers. On their 5th wedding anniversary, John took Sarah up to the hill behind their house, the one that overlooked the whole property. They stood there in the evening light, watching the sun set over their land, their children playing in the yard below. "Do you ever think about that night?" John asked. "The night you missed the train?" "All the time," Sarah said. "I think about how different my life would be if I had caught it. I would have gone to Thomas's wedding and then gone back to Boston, probably. I never would have met you." "I think about it too. I was heading to Arizona. I had no plans to stop, no plans to talk to anyone. And then you walked into my camp and everything changed." Sarah leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I am glad I missed that train. I am glad I found your fire. I am glad you asked no questions." "I am glad too." John kissed the top of her head. "Best thing that ever happened to me was you walking out of that darkness." They stood there for a long time, watching the sun sink lower, watching the stars begin to appear. Below them, Samuel called out that he had found a lizard, and Grace shrieked with delight. Their life was simple, but it was good. It was everything Sarah had never known she wanted. In the years that followed, the ranch grew and prospered. John's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from all over California to buy his animals. Sarah's sewing business grew as well, and she eventually hired 2 women from town to help her keep up with the orders. They had another child in 1890, a boy they named James, and their house was always full of noise and laughter and love. Thomas and Claire visited often, bringing their own growing family to stay for long weekends. Thomas had started a successful business in San Francisco, and he always joked that Sarah had made the better choice, trading city life for the ranch. But Sarah knew he was happy too, and that was all that mattered. As the years passed and the new century approached, Sarah sometimes thought back to that midnight in September 1883, when she had stood on the platform in Eureka, Nevada, watching the train pull away without her. She had felt so lost that night, so uncertain about what would come next. She could never have imagined that she would find everything she needed in the middle of the desert, in the form of a quiet cowboy who offered his fire and asked no questions. John was grayer now, the hard work of the ranch having added lines to his face and silver to his hair. But he was still the same man who had shared his coffee with a stranger, who had walked her through the desert, who had given her his last dollars so she could reach her brother. He was still kind and brave and loyal, and Sarah loved him more with every passing year. In 1900, on a warm summer evening, they sat on the porch of their house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel was married now with 2 children of his own, and he worked the ranch alongside his father. Grace lived in town with her husband, a school teacher, But she visited every Sunday with their baby daughter. James was still at home, 17 years old, and already taller than his father with dreams of becoming a veterinarian. "We did all right, did we not?" John said, reaching over to take Sarah's hand. "We did better than all right," Sarah said. "We did wonderfully." "Do you ever regret it? Giving up the city, the life you might have had?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to have. You are the man I was meant to find." "Even though I was just a drifter with nothing to offer?" "Especially because of that. You offered me everything that mattered. You offered me love and honesty and a partnership that has made me happier than I ever thought possible." John brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Sarah Garrett. I have loved you since that first night, even though I did not know it yet. And I love you, John Garrett, always and forever." They sat there as the sun set, as the stars came out one by one, as their family gathered around them. The ranch that John had built, the life they had created together, the children and grandchildren who bore their names and their values, all of it had started with a missed train and a fire in the darkness. Sarah had learned something important that night in the desert, something she had carried with her through all the years since. Sometimes the worst moments, the ones where everything seems to be falling apart, are actually the beginning of something better. Sometimes missing the train is exactly what needs to happen. Sometimes a stranger's kindness can change your entire life. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, the cowboy who offers his fire and asks no questions turns out to be the love of your life, the partner you were always meant to find, even if you had to travel halfway across the country and sleep on the cold desert ground to find him. As the evening deepened and the children started to get tired, Samuel called up to the porch that he was taking his family home. Grace and her husband left shortly after, and James headed inside to do his homework. Sarah and John remained on the porch, neither wanting to break the peaceful spell of the evening. "Tell me again," Sarah said softly. "Tell me about that night." John knew what she meant. After all these years, she still liked to hear him tell the story, to hear his perspective on the night they met. "I was camped at the edge of Eureka," John began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a story told many times before. "I had been on the trail for 3 days and I was tired. I built a fire and made some coffee, and I was just sitting there, not thinking about much of anything. And then I heard footsteps, someone walking toward me out of the darkness. I put my hand on my gun because you never know who might be approaching your camp. But then I heard a woman's voice, and she said she did not mean any trouble, that she had just missed the train and was cold." Sarah smiled, listening even though she knew every word by heart. "And when you walked into the firelight," John continued, "I saw this woman with blonde hair and tired eyes, carrying a valise like it held everything she owned in the world. You looked scared, but you were trying not to show it, trying to be brave. And I thought, here is someone who has had a hard day. I can share my fire with her. It is just a fire." "But it was not just a fire," Sarah said. "No," John agreed. "It was not. It was the beginning of everything." They fell quiet again, and Sarah thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a series of small decisions and random chances could lead to something so perfect. If the wagon had not thrown a shoe, if she had run faster, if the conductor had waited just one more minute, she would have caught that train. She would have gone to Thomas's wedding and returned to Boston, and John would have ridden south to Arizona, and they never would have known what they were missing. But that was not what happened. But the train left without her at midnight. A cowboy offered his fire and asked no questions, and 2 lonely souls found each other in the wilderness. As the years continued to roll by, their life together remained full and rich. John taught Samuel everything he knew about horses, and the ranch became known throughout California for producing the finest stock. Sarah's dress shop, run mostly by the women she had hired, became a fixture in the local community. Known for quality work at fair prices, she still took on special projects herself, wedding dresses mostly, finding joy in creating something beautiful for young brides who reminded her of her own wedding day. Grace had 2 more children, both boys, and her husband became the principal of the town school. James went off to university to study veterinary medicine, just as he had dreamed, and returned to work with the animals on the ranch, providing care not just for their own horses but for livestock throughout the region. In 1905, Sarah and John celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew. The house and yard were packed with people, friends and neighbors and family, all coming to celebrate the couple who had built such a good life together. During the party, Thomas pulled Sarah aside. He was graying now too, his face showing the lines of a life well lived. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Thank me? For what?" "For taking a chance and coming west, for missing that train. If you had not, you never would have met John, and I never would have gotten to know him. He is like a brother to me now, Sarah. And seeing you two together, seeing how happy you have made each other, it has taught me a lot about what love should be." Sarah hugged her brother tightly. "I am glad I came too, for so many reasons." Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently? Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. I am too grateful for what I have to waste time thinking about what might have been. Thomas nodded. "That is wise. Claire and I are very happy for you both. You deserve every bit of happiness you have found." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the children had cleaned up, Sarah and John took their traditional walk up to the hill behind the house. It had become their place over the years, the spot where they went to talk about important things, to make decisions, to simply be together away from the bustle of daily life. 20 years, Sarah said, looking out over the ranch. "Can you believe it? Feels like longer, feels like I have known you my whole life. In the best way, I hope. In the very best way." John put his arm around her. "You know what I was thinking about today? I was thinking about how afraid I was that first morning when you asked me to come with you to San Francisco." "Afraid? Of what?" "Of wanting something too much. I had spent so long not wanting anything, not letting myself care about anything because I thought that was safer. And then you asked me to come with you, and I wanted to so badly it scared me. I thought if I let myself care, if I let myself hope, I would just end up disappointed. But you came anyway." "I did. And it was the best decision I ever made. You taught me that it is okay to want things, to care about things. You taught me that hoping for something better is not foolish. It is brave." Sarah turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You taught me things too. You taught me that there are good people in the world, people who will help you just because you need help. You taught me that home is not a place, it is a person. And you taught me that love does not have to be complicated. Sometimes it is as simple as sharing a fire on a cold night." They kissed, and it was as sweet and meaningful as their first kiss had been on Thomas's wedding day, 20 years and a lifetime ago. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. In 1908, Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack. Sarah was devastated, and John held her while she cried, just as he had held her through every difficult moment of their life together. They brought Claire to live with them on the ranch, and she spent her remaining years surrounded by family, helping with the grandchildren and teaching Grace's daughter how to sew. In 1910, James married a sweet girl from town, a farmer's daughter with a quick laugh and a way with animals. They built a house on the far end of the property and started their own family. The ranch now spanned 50 acres, purchased bit by bit over the years as John's business grew. Samuel's oldest son, who they called Sam to avoid confusion, showed a remarkable talent with horses. By the time he was 15, he could ride anything and had a natural sense for training that even surpassed his grandfather's. John spent hours with the boy, teaching him everything he knew, passing on a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. In 1915, Sarah and John became great-grandparents when Sam married and had a daughter of his own. Holding that tiny baby, the fourth generation of their family, Sarah felt overwhelmed with emotion. She thought about her parents, about how proud they would have been. She thought about that young woman who had missed the train in Eureka, Nevada so many years ago, and how she could never have imagined that she would end up here, holding her great-granddaughter, surrounded by a family that loved her. "What are you thinking about?" John asked. He was sitting beside her on the porch, watching her hold the baby. "I am thinking about how blessed we are. How many people get to see this? How many people get to hold their great-grandchildren?" "Not many, I would guess." John reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand, and her fingers wrapped around his thumb. "She is beautiful. She looks like you." "Poor thing," Sarah laughed. "Stop that. You are a handsome man, John Garrett, and you always have been." "If you say so." They sat together in the afternoon sun, the baby dozing between them, and Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. This was what life was supposed to be. Not easy, not without pain or struggle, but full of love and meaning and connection. Every hardship they had faced, every difficult choice they had made, had been worth it to arrive at this moment. As they grew older, John's body began to show the effects of decades of hard physical labor. His back troubled him, and his hands ached in the cold. But he still went out every day to work with the horses, refusing to fully retire. Sarah's eyes were not what they used to be, and she could no longer do the fine detail work she had once excelled at. But she still sewed, still created, finding joy in the act of making something beautiful. In 1920, on a crisp October morning, John had a stroke. Sarah found him collapsed in the barn, and Samuel and James carried him into the house. The doctor came and did what he could, but the prognosis was not good. The stroke had been severe, and while John survived it, he was partially paralyzed on his left side. For the first few weeks, John was frustrated and angry. He hated not being able to do the things he had always done, hated needing help with simple tasks. But slowly, with Sarah's patient encouragement, he began to accept his new limitations. He could still ride with help getting into the saddle. He could still walk, though with a cane. And most importantly, he could still be with his family, could still sit on the porch and watch his legacy unfold before him. Sarah took care of him with the same devotion he had always shown her. She helped him dress, prepared his meals the way he liked them, sat with him on the porch in the evenings. And John, who had always been so independent, learned to accept her care with grace and gratitude. "I am sorry I am not much use anymore," he said one evening. "Do not say that. You are exactly as useful as you need to be. You are here, you are with me, and that is all I have ever wanted. I wanted to take care of you. I wanted to make sure you were provided for. John, look around. Look at what we built together. I am provided for. Our children are provided for. Our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are provided for. You have given me more than I could ever have dreamed of. I just wish I had more time. There is so much I still want to do." Sarah took his hand. "Then we will do it together, whatever time we have left. We have always done everything together." They had 5 more years. 5 years of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, of watching their family grow and thrive, of remembering the life they had shared. John grew frailer, his body slowly failing, but his mind remained sharp until the very end. He could still tell stories, still make Sarah laugh, still tell her he loved her every single day. In the spring of 1925, John died peacefully in his sleep. He was 66 years old. Sarah woke to find him beside her, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. She did not cry immediately. Instead, she sat with him for a long time, memorizing his face one last time, saying goodbye to the man who had been her partner for 40 years. The funeral was huge. People came from all over California, friends and family and business associates, everyone whose lives had been touched by John Garrett. Samuel gave a eulogy, talking about his father's kindness and integrity, about how he had taught them all what it meant to work hard and love deeply. Sarah sat in the front row, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she felt both the enormous weight of her loss and the enormous gratitude for having had him at all. After John died, Sarah continued to live on the ranch. Samuel and his wife took care of her, making sure she was comfortable and never alone unless she wanted to be. She spent her days in the garden, at her sewing table, and most often on the porch, looking out over the land that she and John had built together. People worried that she would fade away without John, that she would lose her will to live. But Sarah was stronger than that. She had learned long ago that life was precious, that every moment was a gift. She had been given 40 years with the love of her life, and she would honor those years by living fully for whatever time she had left. She told stories to her great-grandchildren, stories about the old days, about the Wild West when it was still wild. She told them about missing the train in Eureka, Nevada, about the cowboy who had offered his fire and asked no questions. She told them about walking through the desert, about falling in love, about building a life from nothing but hard work and hope. And the children listened, wide-eyed, understanding that they were part of something bigger than themselves, part of a love story that had started with a missed train and grown into a legacy. Sarah lived for another 10 years after John died. In the spring of 1935, at the age of 74, she died quietly in her sleep, in the same bed where John had died, in the house they had built together. Her children found her in the morning, and they said that she looked peaceful, almost happy, as if she was glad to finally be going to join the man she had loved for more than half her life. They buried her beside John, on the hill overlooking the ranch. The entire family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations coming to say goodbye to the woman who had been the heart of their family. Samuel, now an old man himself, spoke about his mother's strength and grace, about how she had taught them all what it meant to love unconditionally. Grace, frail but determined, sang a hymn in a wavering voice. James read a passage from the Bible about love never failing. And young Sam, now 45 with children of his own, told the story one more time. The story of how his grandmother had missed a train at midnight, how a cowboy had offered his fire and asked no questions, how 2 strangers had found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful that had lasted long after they were gone. The ranch continued for generations after that. Sam took it over from his father, and his children took it over from him. The horses they bred and trained became legendary throughout the West. The family grew and spread, but they always remembered where they came from, always remembered the story of Sarah and John. In the barn, now more than a century old but carefully maintained, there hung a framed photograph. It showed a young couple on their wedding day standing in front of a judge's office in San Francisco. The man was tall and serious-looking, wearing new clothes that did not quite fit right. The woman was small and blonde, wearing a simple blue dress, her hand tucked into his arm. They were both looking at the camera, but you could tell they were aware only of each other. The love between them was so obvious, so palpable, that everyone who saw the photograph felt it. Below the photograph, mounted on a brass plaque, were the words that Sam had inscribed there in 1935, after his grandmother died. The train left without her at midnight. A cowboy offered his fire and asked no questions. And from that kindness, a love story began that would last forever. Because that was the truth. John and Sarah were gone, but their love remained. It remained in the children they had raised, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who bore their names and their values. It remained in the ranch they had built, in every fence post and barn beam and acre of land. It remained in the stories that were told and retold, passed down through the generations like precious heirlooms. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew across the hills and the stars came out in their thousands, some of the family members swore they could feel it still, the presence of that love, as real and warm as a campfire in the darkness, as enduring as the mountains themselves. A reminder that kindness matters, that love matters, that sometimes missing the train is exactly what needs to happen to find your way home.